Hello again. Sorry for the confusion. Sorry for the confusion. Just give me a minute to share it around and then we'll get started. All right, now. Yes, you are good to share now. I'm sorry, Stephanie. I had some confusion, which I'll explain in a moment, but this is correct. Going to start in a moment. I'm just sharing it around to a couple of places. All right, one more place and then I'm ready to go. Okay. Okay, thank you everyone. I am sorry for the confusion. Now I understand why so few people accepted the invitation to this. I created the event on my own personal page. I did not create it on Real Progressives, and I did not. Kidding. I didn't realize that until now, so there was confusion. People were asking me, "Is there an event tonight?" And I was like, "Of course there is." I created it, and then I just realized now that it was created on my personal page. So I had to restart the stream. Okay, so we're good to go. All right, so thank you for sharing this around. Thank you for being with me. I'm going to basically be giving a lecture on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night, I'm going to be giving this lesson in a one-on-one fashion. I'm going to have a guest with me, which I'm very excited about, Regina Bolton, who I interviewed 2 years ago. She is awesome. I really like her, and I'm very excited to teach her. So this is going to be my first one-on-one since I taught Graham Elwood a couple of months ago or a month and a half ago. So Tuesday night at 9 o'clock on Real Progressives, there is an event for that. Let's get started. Okay, so before, gotta plug these in. I need to plug these in. Excuse me. All right, here we go. Modern money. I'm going to introduce you to modern money. Before we start, I need to say something very important to make clear who I am and what I know. I am not a teacher. I am not an expert. I am not an economist. There are many economists, MMT economists and experts around the world who have been looking into this stuff and researching this stuff for decades. they are the ones who are my teachers. So I am a student. It is not my job to teach. That is up to them. However, I am an activist, and what I can do is I can reach out to those who would not normally realize that it's a subject and choose to learn it, and I can introduce it to them and then immediately pass them off to the experts. So I can unplug them from the matrix, hold their hand while they acclimate their eyes to the real world, and then as soon as they're ready, I send them outside, and it is time to learn from the experts. So as soon as your eyes are open to modern money, my job is done. Okay, so in a one-on-one lesson, if I was talking to someone, I would ask them, what are taxes? What are federal taxes used for? And why do we collect federal taxes? And usually what I'm told is that it is used to help the military, it is used to pay for health care, it is used for when people retire, so basically pays for Social Security. I've also gotten a couple of answers unrelated to paying for things, which is like it is something that you pay taxes just because it gives you the sensation of having skin in the game, of being invested. But basically it is that federal taxes are used to pay for things. So we're going to set that aside. We're going to come back to that. But that is what I present to people to give me, their feelings before I tell them anything. So where does money come from? So some of our money is in our wallets. We have money, we have dollar bills, we have coins, and we do use that some. However, much more of our money is credit cards and bank accounts and checks, which is essentially authorizing electronic transfers of money. So most of the money that the American people deal with is electronic, is in a computer. So tonight we're going to set aside physical money. We're going to set aside bills and coins, and we're only going to talk about electronic money. Physical money is important, but it is a small part of, it's a small part of the picture, so we're going to set it aside. I am assuming that people can hear me okay. You're going to have to let me know otherwise. There's honestly not much I can do. This is the microphone, but you'll let me know. Okay, we are only going to talk about high-powered money, and that's money created by the Congress. Bank-created money is money that you immediately owe back. So if you borrow $100 from the bank, you immediately owe them. You are immediately indebted to that bank for $100 plus interest. That is not true with congressional-created money, high-powered money, where you do not owe it back. You have to pay some taxes. Good, thank you, Aaron. You have to pay some taxes, but the rest of that money that you don't pay taxes on is yours to keep and do with as you will, to invest, to save, to spend, and so on. So we're only talking about high-powered money, Congress-created money. So where specifically do you get your money? So you, for example, you might get a paycheck. I might get some money from my patrons. Real Progressives has patrons, so they get their money from patrons, from merchandise purchases, if you sell shirts and so on. So you get it from your company. Yes, my little one wants to kiss out. Good night. So come in quick. I'm on talking to a lot of people. Goodbye. You can say hello and then go to bed. And I need you to not come down anymore. Bye. Say hello.
Bye.
Okay, go away now.
Bye.
Bye. I need you to go. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. So we get our paycheck from a company. The company sells a product to a person. That person gets their paycheck, and so on and so forth. It goes on and on and on and on. But ultimately, that money came from the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve spent money into the economy, and that money was used to do something that the government needed, like a law, and eventually that now was given to a company to implement some law, and then it was paid to people, and that's how it works its way. But the Federal Reserve is the ultimate answer. But the Federal Reserve doesn't just do it on their own. they are told to create money by the Treasury. The Treasury is told to create money or tell the Federal Reserve because a bill was signed into law by the president, and the president signs a bill into law. The bill was written by Congress. The ultimate answer is that the money comes from Congress. Congress writes a number into a bill, $10 billion for some military thing. The president signs that bill into law. Money is born. At that moment, money is born. It is created. Then the law triggers the Treasury, who tells the Federal Reserve, create that money. The money goes to the state reserves, the state reserves send it to the individual banks, and then it goes to the companies and the people in order to implement that law. So there are alternative theories on the Federal Reserve, that it is not at the command of Congress, that banks control the governments don't control the banks. And maybe that's true, Illuminati and Rothschilds and so on. Maybe it's true, the truth is whatever it is. But for the sake of this lesson, we are postponing that. You need to postpone that skepticism until after we talk. After we're done, you should be skeptical. You should do whatever homework you feel is necessary. You should not believe me. You should decide the truth for yourself. But during this conversation, I'm asking you to have an open mind. And during this conversation, we are saying what the Constitution says, which is Article 1, Section 8. And that is that the Congress is the monopoly currency issuer. They are the only ones that are allowed to create the currency. They do so by writing a number into a bill. That bill is signed into law. And if they wrote 10 billion into a bill, that bill is signed into law by the president. $10 billion is born because they want it to be born. And it is very similar to a child drawing a $1 trillion bill, $10 billion bill on a piece of construction paper. It is very similar to going into a spreadsheet and writing the number 10 billion. It is very similar to go on a scoreboard and ticking up the score by 10. It is there, it exists because you want it to exist. So the monopoly currency issuer. The Congress is the monopoly currency issuer. They can create as much money as they want, whenever they want to do it, for whatever they want to do it. And they're the only ones in the world that are allowed to do it. They do it because they want to. Now, yes, they must be responsible, but what enforces that responsibility, we are not yet ready to talk about. There is something very, very important that forces the government to not create more money than is appropriate, because doing so would cause enormous problems. We will get there. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't create infinite money. They can. They can create infinite money. So, the United States government is a fiat currency. We have been a fiat currency since August of 1971. And that means that our money is no longer backed by gold. In August of 1971 and before, we were on the gold standard. And that means that we have 500,000 tons of gold, and for every ounce of gold, that could be exchanged for X dollars, for $100. Okay? So that's a gold standard. Every dollar is backed by a finite piece of gold, of something physical. We are no longer on the gold standard. Japan is a fiat currency. We are a fiat currency. Australia, Canada, England, New Zealand, and the European Union. We are all fiat currencies. We are all not on the gold standard. So in August of 1971, many countries went off of the gold standard and became fiat currencies. European Union is obviously more recent, more recent creation. So, me and you are currency issuers. No, me and you are currency users. The government is the monopoly currency issuer. We are currency users. Our families, our companies, our municipalities, our states, in even other countries, Russia and China, whoever uses the US dollar, they are a currency user. Currency users must get income before we can spend. We are not allowed to create the currency. If we tried, we would go to federal prison for counterfeiting. The United States Congress, the federal government, is the only one in the world that is allowed to create the currency, and they can create as much as they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want. And they're the only ones that are allowed to do it. So you and I can't spend money until we first get it from somewhere else. But the federal government is the monopoly currency issuer. They can create the money whenever they want, for whatever they want, and however much they want. They're the only ones that are allowed to do it. So if you are the federal government, do you need any income? Do you need to find money from somewhere else before you can spend it? And the answer, of course, is no, you don't. If you can create as much as you want, whenever you want, for whatever you want, and you're the only one that's allowed to do it, you don't need income, because if you need to spend any money, you can just create it. You can create as much as you want, just like a child drawing on a piece of construction paper. No, we don't. Most of the money is electronic, but the sentiment is accurate, that a child wants money to exist, their own money to exist, they can will it to exist just by drawing it on a piece of paper. So for the federal government, they do not need income because they can create it infinitely, so they don't need it. So for them only, to create money is exactly the same as saying to spend money. So the federal government writes $10 billion into a bill. That's passed into law. Those $10 billion have been created. And that is exactly the same thing as saying that those $10 billion were spent into the economy. $10 billion were spent into the economy. So now the federal government does not need any income. They can create as much as they want, whenever they want. So obviously they don't need it because they can just create it. So if that's true, then why would the federal government ever need to borrow from China or from anybody? And if that's true, if they can create as much money as they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want, and they're only ones that are allowed to do it, then what does it mean to be in debt? Because if you owe someone $20 trillion, create $20 trillion. What's the big deal? Nobody else is allowed to create it, only you can. So what does it mean for somebody else to demand that we must pay them? So we pay them. We can create it and pay them without any consequence. So, in the beginning of the country, when the United States government first formed, but before the first dollar was given to the people, before the first dollar was actually created, can the United States government go to the people and say, you owe me $100 in taxes? Does that make sense? Is that possible? And the answer is no. You can't pay taxes until you get that money from somewhere else. Excuse me. And ultimately, that money must come from the Congress. So it is not possible to pay taxes until you get the money from the government. So, okay. Let me switch just a little bit. So in the very beginning, I asked you, what are federal taxes paid for? What are federal taxes used for? And why do we collect federal taxes? And the answer I'm most given is it is used to pay for things. Military, health care, any program, Medicaid, college. But we also just came to the conclusion that the federal government needs no income. So they don't need to borrow from anywhere if they can create it as much as they want. There's no such thing. I don't understand what it means to be in debt. So if they can create as much money as they want and they don't need income, then how is it possible that taxes pay for things? Those two things conflict. Why would it need to collect taxes in order to pay for things if the federal government needs no income? Those two things conflict. Something is wrong with one or the other or a combination of both. So which one do you believe more? Do you believe that the federal government doesn't need income and can create as much money as it wants? Or do you believe that taxes must be paying for federal programs? One of those can't be true. So the answer is that the federal government can create as much money as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it's the only one that's allowed to do it. So taxes do not, at the federal level only, we're not talking about state, we're not talking about municipal. At the federal level only, federal taxes do not pay for anything. They are critical to the functioning of society, but they do not pay for anything at the federal level. So Ellis Winningham taught me this, which is federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Federal spending funds federal taxes. I'll say it again. Federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Federal spending funds federal taxes. So again, you can't pay taxes until you get that dollar from the government. Yes, from your paycheck, but ultimately it comes from the government. So you cannot pay taxes until you first get that dollar from the government. And the same thing on the other side is that federal taxes do not pay for anything. Not just that they shouldn't or they don't, they cannot pay for anything because the federal government doesn't need any income. So this is the big lie. This is the big lie that every other lie is based on. And that is that the federal government needs income because the federal government the economy of the federal government is just like the economy of me and you and our households and our companies and our states and our cities and so on. That is the big lie. It is not true. The federal government does not need income before it can spend. You and I need income before we can spend. That is the big lie, and every other lie is based on it, as we will see. So I'm going to do one more section, and then I'm going to take a break and take a look at your comments, if there are anything, or at least just take a little break. Section number 2, the Pony for All Act of 2018. Completely unrelated to what we were talking about. The Pony for All Act of 2018. So we're going to take a ridiculous situation seriously for a few minutes. So after the campaign, the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton said in her book, basically that Bernie Sanders wants to give everybody a pony. Oh, and it's so nice, Bernie, that you want to give everybody a pony. Everybody would love to get a pony, and I love ponies, but how are you going to pay for it? How are we actually going to do it? Because it's a nice thing to do, but how can we do it? So I want to tell you that no matter what you think of this idea, may be ridiculous, it is genuinely possible that we could do this. We could give every single man, woman, and child their own biological, literal, actual pony, if we wanted to. And we're going to talk about exactly how that's possible. So you and I are congressmen, and it is our job to write this bill, the Pony for All Act of 2018. Trump has already committed to signing it. And we have the support of every Democrat and 75% of Republicans. It's just unbelievable cooperation. We also had the commitment of getting the best people in the country to help us manage this. And we were told that money is no object, it's infinite. But it is our job to write this bill. So how do we make this happen? How do we make this happen? So we have roughly 320 million people in the country, and very roughly we have about 500,000 to 1 million ponies now in the country. So 320 million people, 500,000 ponies. How do we make this happen? How long will it take for this to happen? It clearly can't happen tomorrow, because if we tried to make it happen tomorrow, we would have way more demand than supply. And that would cause chaos. That would cause prices to go crazy. That would cause black markets. That would cause fights. It would cause a lot of problems. So, how do we get 500,000 ponies to get up to 320 million ponies so that every American can have one if they want one? And the answer is, we must have mommy and daddy ponies doing their thing over and over and over and over again. That's the answer. This is a simplistic thing, but we need more ponies. How do we get more ponies? That mommies and daddies do their things over and over and over again. And now we have to figure out, given that, how long will it take for 500,000 to get to 320 million? So now we have to think of gestation period. How long is a pony in the mom's belly? So let's say, I have no idea, let's say 9 months. How long after a pony is born can a mother do it again? Let's say, I have no idea, let's say 2 months. So that's 11 months. So we have an 11-month cycle. How long will it take for 500,000 to reproduce into 320 million? I have no clue, but I'm going to guess 20 years. Okay, so 20 years. So now, we are now on our way to getting 320 million ponies by 2038. So on 2038, every single American that wants one can get one. And there truly will be enough for them. But now, we have significant consequences because of our exploding population of ponies. What are the consequences of doing that? We can take care of, we can feed 500,000 ponies. We are not prepared to take care of an exploding population of ponies, going very quickly into the millions and tens of millions and soon enough hundreds of millions. What does this do? What are the consequences of this? Now we need a lot more food. We need a lot more water distributed to them. We need a lot more horseshoes. We need more fencing. We need more shelters. We need people to care for the grass that they play on. And I don't know if ponies eat grass, but maybe they eat the grass too. And that implies that we need more blacksmiths and caretakers and breeders and veterinarians. And so that means that we need to educate people to be blacksmiths and breeders and caretakers and veterinarians. And now we must distribute those ponies around the country. We need to create the farms all around the country. We need all of those supplies and all of those people and all that labor distributed around the country. So now we're talking about trucking and shipping. Education. We need to educate all of these people to be in these new, to be new blacksmiths and caretakers and veterinarians and so on. That takes time. So it's going to create all of these new industries, this new industry. So it is a wonderful coincidence that this is going to create a lot of new business for the people. But that is not my point. That is an excellent consequence, but that is not the point that I'm trying to make. Okay, so now we are on our way to having 320 million ponies. We're on our way. And they're all being taken care of and distributed around the country as necessary. It's all finally happening. And now it is time for the people to pick up their ponies. It's 20 years later. And now the people always tell the American people, your pony is ready, go and pick it up. And again, we have the best staff in the world. It's perfectly organized. We don't have to worry about, people fighting anymore because there's enough and they're properly distributed. We have the best staff. But people go and get their ponies and they don't know how to take care of ponies. Their houses are not ready for those animals. So we need to prepare their houses. We need to train the people. We need all of those things that we just spoke about, blacksmiths and horseshoes and fencing and shelters and caretakers and veterinarians. All of these things are now needed by the people on a micro scale all around the country. So now, finally, the people have their ponies. They know how to take care of them. And finally, the final step is 320 million animals. Disposal of dead ponies is now going to be a significant issue. Replacement, disposal, that's a big deal. And that's everything. So now we have gone through the entire life cycle, from birth to death, of how we write this bill, of step by step how this is actually possible. And the most important point here is that we haven't spoken 1 second about money, because no matter how much money we throw at this, let's say we throw $10 trillion at it, and the Congress and the president say, well, this is going to happen in 5 years. I don't care what it takes. We are going to give you $10 trillion, and it is going to happen in 5 years. It's in the law. Within 5 years, every American must have one available to them. What will happen? If we do that, what will happen? And the answer is, it will cause chaos and prices to go crazy and black markets and fights. Because no matter how much money we put into this, it does not change the biological processes of ponies. It does not change how long it takes to educate people. It does not change how long it takes to train the people. It will take 20 years, no matter how much money we throw at it. And that's the important point. Money doesn't matter. Money does not matter at the federal level for the federal government. The only thing that matters is real resources, things in the ground, things that grow, human labor, animals, and time. Time is critical because we can't do this in 5 years. We can do it in 20. Our resources can handle that. Our resources can handle 20 years. It is impossible to do it in 5 years, regardless of the money we throw at it, because our productive capacity is 20 years. Our capacity to produce can handle it in 20 years. It cannot handle it in 5 years or any other amount of time, any shorter amount of time. Money doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is real resources. And these are the things that humans cannot change. Humans cannot change the behavior and the quantity of real resources. So no matter how many human rules we put on top, we impose on ourselves, humans don't follow rules. That's the reality. Humans don't follow rules. The only thing that humans can do is the only rules that humans follow are the ones that are outside of their control, and real resources is exactly what that external constraint is. So I'm going to stop there and take a break. Okay. So that's part one, and there's going to be 2 more parts. So I think, yes, I need to get this more efficient and shorter, but I am getting much more accurate, and that's my primary goal. And maybe this is going to turn into a 10 video series, who knows? But I have a long way. I have a long way to go, but this has come a long way since I've begun. So let me see some of your comments here. Oops. Thank you for being with us, Constantine. What happens to your taxes after they are collecting? Yes, we were going to talk about that in a few minutes. Olga, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Sean, I am introducing modern monetary theory, or modern money, MMT. I'm introducing this. Basically just opening your eyes to the concepts, taking the vast majority of Americans that don't know anything about this, not just don't know, but know the wrong thing. And that's an understatement. Taking you out of the incorrect knowledge to neutral, opening your eyes to modern money, and then passing you on to the experts. That's what I'm doing. I'm introducing you to modern money. Okay, those are the only things I see here. Olga, I don't know what you know or don't know. I apologize if you already know it. I saw the question before, so I was addressing it. All right, I think I'm going to go on to part 2 here. Okay, so this next part is a really loose interpretation of the beginning of our country. This is a really loose interpretation. The history is not the point here. The concepts are the point. So, the beginning of the beginning. So why do we collect taxes? And again, everybody said, most of the people that I've asked said, it pays for things. And it doesn't pay for things. It just does not pay for anything. At the federal level only. So what are taxes collected for at the federal level? Why are they collected? Hi Dan, thank you for being here. Federal taxes are critical to the functioning of society. They're not just, stealing from the people. They're not just control. I mean, they are control, but under a good faith government, that's not a big problem. Parents can be good faith, parents can be abusive, bad faith. The government can be good faith, be supportive of the people. Government can be bad faith. A good faith government, taxes are critical to the functioning of society. So the beginning of the beginning, and this is something that I learned from Fidel Kabub, this concept, that term, the phrase beginning of the beginning. So when the country began, we were fighting the British. So the 13 colonies, we're fighting the British. We want to be independent, and people are fighting for our independence. And the country needs people to fight the British. So if we want to be a country, we've got to fight the British. We've also got to build buildings. We've also got to grow crops and do whatever else it takes to, run the country. So, maybe some people are enthusiastic and they're fighting just because they want to. And that's great. That's great. But some people are not going to want to, whether it's they want to be independent or not, or they just don't want to fight. But if we're going to be a country, we have got to fight the British. So this country needs people to help them fight the British so we can become our own nation. And how do we compel the people to do that? Because enthusiasm isn't going to cut it. Just excitement to be independent. We could put guns to everybody's head and say, you will fight for us, you will grow our crops, and that'll work to a small extent. But as soon as those guns are put down, the people aren't going to continue growing the crops. They're not, that's not going to happen. So the alternative that the United States, the governments came up with is to give the people money. I will pay you $10 a week if you fight my wars, or grow my crops, or build my buildings, or do whatever it takes that I need as a society. Just like a parent tells a child, here's some allowance, you are going to do what's helpful to our household, of taking out the trash and cleaning up from dinner and cleaning your room and making your bed. That's what I need as parents for my household. I need my citizens, my children, to help. That's what a government does. It needs its citizens to take the real resources at its disposal and do what's good for society. Fighting the British at the time was necessary. So we give the people money as incentive. So let me say this more clearly. The purpose of a good faith government, one that cares about all of the people, the purpose of a good faith government is to compel the people to use its real resources at its disposal for the benefit of society. And compel without having to put a gun to their head. That certainly would work to some extent. But we want to compel them in a less violent way. So money is how we compel them to do it. And more specifically, so money is the incentive that we give people to do it, that they get to have some of that money to use for themselves, to buy from each other, and to exchange with each other. But that's not enough to get people to use our money. That's not enough, because when we first started our country, people had the British pound. Everybody was happy using the British pound. But if we want to become our own government, we need to have our own currency. So the United States government created the United States dollar, gave it to the people for doing these things, and then they said, in April, you are going to pay us some of that money in taxes. Not all of it. You get to keep a lot of it. But you are going to pay some of that money in taxes. And if you don't, you will go to jail. You will pay fines. You will have your property confiscated. But primarily, the big one is jail. So now the people care about that money. Now the people care about the US dollar. Now the people get jobs so they can actually get more of that dollar because they're going to have to pay taxes. And that's what it means to drive the currency. The penalty of going to jail if you don't pay your taxes, and the taxes that must be paid in the currency that only the federal government is allowed to create. That is what it means to drive the currency and drive the economy. So that is the purpose of taxes. Drive the currency and drive the economy. Okay. So that's the purpose of taxes. And here is a use. I'm going to talk about two more major uses of taxes. And that is to control demand. Taxes can be used to control demand. So at the beginning, we had 320 million people. We had 500,000 ponies. That is a terrible, terrible situation. So in World War II, actually, let's before we do that, I want to define inflation. So inflation is a scare word. It's something real, but it's used to scare the people. Inflation is not when the price of bread goes up. It is not when the price of gas goes up. It's not when the price of ponies go up. It's not when the price of an entire industry that surrounds the ponies, when all these things go up. That is not inflation. Inflation is when every single product in the United States goes up and continues to go up. That's inflation. It is a macroeconomic phenomenon. So, in World War II, the United States temporarily went off of the gold standard from the end of the Depression to the end of the war. And in 1971, a lot of countries went off the gold standard. But in World War II, just us, we went off the gold standard to have more flexibility to fund the war, to genuinely actually pay for the war. So during this time, car companies, instead of making new cars, they used those real resources, the steel, the rubber, the cloth, instead to make things for the war effort. Boats, ships, planes, artillery, tanks. All of those real resources went away from making new cars and went to the war. No new cars were produced during World War II. Yet, roughly speaking, the amount of money in people's pockets and the desire to buy new cars stayed the same. So now we have X millions of people that want to buy a new car. and we have no new cars to give them. This is a big problem. This problem must be solved because we need to avoid chaos and prices going crazy and black markets and fights. This problem must be solved. And there's only two ways to solve it. Number one is to lower demand, or number two is to raise supply, or some combination of the two. And we can do this with carrots, we can compel the people, we could use sticks, or we could use carrots. We can entice the people, or we could increase supply. But in this particular situation, in the war, we could not increase supply. It was simply not an option. So in this situation, the only thing possible is to decrease demand. So we could do it with a carrot by enticing them. We can do it with a stick by compelling them. So what the United States did during this time, they decided to use a carrot to entice the people. So we had to divert that money. Instead of going to new cars, we had to give the people something more compelling than a new car to spend that money on. And what the United States did, was offer the people war bonds. War bonds were marketed as support the troops, support the war, which strongly implied that the money used to buy war bonds funded the troops and funded the war, which we now know cannot be true because no federal program is funded by taxpayers. Federal programs are only funded by the federal government, and the federal government is the monopoly currency issuer who can create as much money as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it's the only one that's allowed to do it. So federal programs are not funded by federal taxes. So the war effort is not funded by war bonds. So, for example, we offer a war bond. We say, you buy a war bond, we're going to hold your money for, let's say, 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, your bond is going to mature, and we'll give you your however much money you choose, we'll give it back, plus we'll give you 5% interest. So let's say someone chose to spend $1,000 on a war bond. So instead of buying a new car, they buy a war bond out of patriotic duty. They give the government $1,000. The person gets a fancy bond paper in return. It says their name, $1,000, 1957, 1954, 5% interest. And the government has in a ledger, or what we would now have as a spreadsheet, the name of the person, 10 years, 5%. And I got to turn off these notifications. I'm getting overwhelmed here. So they write it down. They write down the name, $1,000, the year it matures, 5%. They write it down. But this is a really mind-twisting thing. It was for me when I first learned it. When you give the federal government $1,000 to pay for a war bond, you're not giving the $1,000 to the government. That's not what you're doing. When Congress creates the money, they write a number into a bill, $10 billion, $10 billion. It's signed into law by the president. Money is born because they want it to be born. They want it to exist. And the other side of it is for war bonds and for taxes. When you pay your taxes, you're not giving the government anything. That money is removed from your bank account, and then nothing else happens. When you pay taxes and when you pay war bonds, the money dies. The money is born when Congress creates it and it's signed into law. The money dies when you pay your taxes or you purchase a war bond. So when you purchase a $1,000 war bond, you are authorizing the federal government through your banks to lower your bank account by $1,000. They are not doing anything on their own side. They do not raise anything by $1,000. The only thing that they do is write it down. Your name, $1,000, 10 years later, 5%. Same thing with taxes. When you pay $1,000 in taxes, you write $1,000 into your tax return. You send that tax return to the federal government. The federal government sees $1,000 on the tax return, and you are off that tax return authorizes the federal government through your bank to reach into your bank account and lower your balance by $1,000. They do not do anything on their side. The only exception is they take that tax return and they put it into a filing cabinet or a folder on a computer. That's it. They don't use that money for anything. All they have is the notation that you paid $1,000 in taxes. That money disappears. It dies. It is not held by the government. 10 years later, your war bond matures, and the federal government creates the currency to pay you back $1,050, your 5% bonus. They created the currency to pay you back. That money was not held by the government during that time. So taxes are compelled. You must pay your taxes. War bonds are voluntary. Taxes are held, or I should say die, for infinite years. War bonds, for example, are held in this case for 10 years, and then they come back to life. They die for 10 years and then come back to life. And of course, taxes have no bonus because they never mature. So it is not accurate to say that the federal government has money, and it is not accurate to say that the federal government does not have money. Neither of those things can be true. When the federal government creates money, it sends it out into the economy immediately. It does not hold it itself. The final use that we're going to talk about of taxes. So we said the purpose of taxes is to drive the currency and drive the economy. A use of the taxes is to control demand. And then the final use that we're going to talk about is to impose moral decisions. So federal taxes are used to impose moral decisions. Now, some of these actually happen on the state level or the municipal level, but the concept is exactly correct of what I'm about to say. We can raise taxes to discourage behavior, and we can lower taxes to encourage behavior. So, for example, vices, alcohol, cigarettes, gambling, drugs. We as a society could decide it is okay to smoke, it is okay to gamble, it is okay to drink. But what we cannot accept is when these things get to an addictive level and start to affect our country on a macroeconomic level. If alcohol gets to an addictive level, then that's going to start affecting our healthcare system on a macroeconomic level. The government doesn't really care about individuals per se. It doesn't care about the micro happenings around the country, microeconomics. It does care about the macroeconomic effects. And when we do the right thing for the country as a whole, for the macroeconomic, the macro economy, then that does also help individuals. But the government only has a macroeconomic kind of view. So we can increase taxes on vices, some, so they can use it, but it discourages them from going to an addictive level. If we were a good faith government that actually cared about the planet, cared about the people, then if I was in charge, I would increase taxes on environmental pollution dramatically. So it would be impossible to pollute like we do, greenhouse gases and so on. So I would raise taxes on that a lot. So I raise taxes on vices some as a federal government. I'd raise taxes on polluting a lot. So you can use different levels depending on how much you want to discourage it. The other side of it, we want to lower taxes to encourage behavior. I want to lower taxes on gym memberships. I want to lower taxes on activities that lower pollution, solar panels and electric cars and so on. And then finally, one more, raising taxes to discourage behavior. And that is excuse me. One more idea on raising taxes to discourage behavior, and that is to lower income inequality. We want to raise taxes on the rich, because we as a society might decide on a threshold of what's moral as far as being wealthy. We might say that when you get up to $500 million, that's fine, enjoy it. $500 million, just enjoy it. We're not going to tax it hardly at all. You can just enjoy it. But once you get above $500 million, then it starts becoming impossible to get even more wealthy without extracting wealth and extracting from the well-being of others, to profiting off of our sickness, to profiting off of our death, to profiting off of our suffering. It's impossible to get more wealthy without hurting other people. And then there's another threshold, which is you can be so rich that you can buy our politicians with your pocket change and therefore create the laws. And we are obviously well into that territory. So modern money does not say that we should tax the rich. Modern money doesn't say that we shouldn't tax the rich. Modern money doesn't say how much we should or should not tax the rich. But I, as a progressive, take the knowledge of modern money and decide that we got to tax the rich. We must tax the rich, because we don't want people to be this powerful. We don't want people to be able to buy politicians. We don't want people to get so rich that it starts hurting other people. So we want to tax the rich because it is the moral and just and equitable and right thing to do. But this is the important point. We don't tax the rich because we need their money. And in fact, it is impossible to tax the rich because we need their money. Because the federal government is the monopoly currency issuer, and to creating money for them is a child's game. They can create as much as they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want, and they're the only ones that are allowed to do it. They must be responsible. They must respect their real resources or they will cause huge problems. But they can create as much as they want. And therefore, taxing the rich is not possible to get their money. It's not possible. So I, as a progressive, choose to tax the rich. I choose to take the knowledge of modern money and I choose to use that knowledge and decide that I want to tax the rich. I also choose that I want to lower the military. Again, we do not want to lower the military, reduce the military, because we need their money, because I want to instead use it for healthcare and free college and so on. It is not possible to get that money. But I do want to reduce the military because it is the moral thing to do. We can't do it immediately. We must do it slowly and over time. But our military is supposed to protect the people. It is critical to the functioning of society. But we have gone far beyond that, and we are the bullies of the world. And we extract from the well-being of other countries with our military. And that is immoral. So, modern money is a body of knowledge. Modern money is the reality of how our economy works, of how it actually functions. Modern money does not prescribe. It does not tell you what to do or not to do. The only thing that it does is describe our economy, whether you learn it or not, whether you believe it or not. Let me say that again. Whether you learn it or not, whether you believe it or not, it is the reality of how our economy actually functions. It is the truth. So for example, another example, medicine. Medicine is a body of knowledge. With the knowledge of medicine, which is a science, which is definitive, which is not really debatable in many ways, you can choose to use the knowledge of medicine to heal. You can choose to use it to conduct terrible Nazi experiments. And you can choose to simply never practice. With the knowledge of religion, which is a knowledge of beliefs, you can choose to take the knowledge of religion and practice Christianity, You can choose to practice Judaism. You can choose to practice Satanism. Or you can choose to not practice at all. You could choose to be agnostic or atheist. With the knowledge, with a socket wrench, with a tool, with a socket wrench. You can choose to keep that socket wrench in your toolbox. You could choose to throw it away. You could choose to beat people over the head with it. Or you could choose to unscrew stuff, which is its intended purpose. You can choose to use it or not use it as you please, as you believe is the right thing to do. It is not the fault of the wrench if someone chooses to use it to beat people over the head with it. It is not the fault of religion if someone chooses to practice Satanism. It is not the fault of medicine if someone chooses to practice Nazi experiments. It is not the fault of modern money if our politicians choose to take that knowledge and screw the people. We have an abusive government. We have a bad faith government. They choose to take the knowledge of modern money and screw the people. We should not be angry at modern money. We should be angry at the politicians that choose to take that knowledge and use it for evil. Use it against us. So, modern money says that the Federal Reserve is at the command of Congress. And maybe they're cheating. Maybe the masters of the universe are really cheating. Maybe the banks are indeed are in charge of governments. And it's not that governments are in charge of the Federal Reserve, as the Constitution says, and as we understand to be true. Maybe it is the truth that the banks are actually in charge of governments. That's cheating. That's not following the rules. And you cannot fight the cheaters if you don't know what the rules are. You can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. Modern money is the rules. You need to learn the rules. Okay, so that's all for that. So now, borrow and debt. Switching subjects here. Borrow and debt. These are based on the big lie. The big lie is that the federal government, the economy of the federal government, is just like the economy of me and you. The federal government needs income before it can spend. We now know that's not true, but that is the big lie. They want you to believe and feel like the economy of the federal government is just like me and you, and they have the same restrictions as we do. So borrowing and debt. When I borrow from a bank, I immediately owe them $100 plus interest. I am in debt. I am indebted to the bank. And if I don't pay it back, the bank will do whatever it takes to get my money back. But if the federal government can create as much money as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it's the only one that's allowed to do it, why would it ever need to borrow from anybody else? No one else is allowed to create it. And they can create as much as they want. What does it mean to borrow, the federal government to borrow from anybody else? But all we hear is that the federal government has to borrow a record amount from China. What does that mean? China can't create the currency, and we can create it as much as we want. That makes no sense, yet that's all we hear. So the national debt. If you can create as much money as you want, whenever you want, for whatever you want, what does it mean to be in debt? What does it mean to be in debt? And who are we in debt to? I'm in debt to my bank for my loan. The second I get that money, I'm in debt. What about the federal government? Who are they in debt to? We now know that it makes no sense to borrow, for them to borrow from anybody, so they can't be in debt. If they have no need to borrow, then what does it mean to be in debt to begin with? And who do they owe it to? The bank makes a stink when I owe them something. They don't go quietly into the night. Yet this mythical thing that the US government owes money to, I don't ever hear them making a stink. I don't ever see articles of China complaining, where's our money? We're going to call the space debt collectors after you. We never hear any of that. All we hear all we hear is our politicians, our media, our so-called experts, and our education system saying that our debt is out of control. We've got to pay it back, or our future generations are going to be crushed. Our country is going to go bankrupt. Yet we hear nothing from the people that we owe. Who do we owe? And the answer that I find the funniest is the Decepticons in outer space. So here is the definition of our national debt. I'm going to give you a technical definition, and then I'm going to give you an easier to understand definition. The technical definition of the national debt is all of the money that has been spent into the economy since the country began. Excuse me for a moment, my son's being a little loud. Hey, Jacob, excuse me. You're being a little loud. I'm talking to a lot of people here, okay? Thank you. Excuse me. The national debt is the total of all of the money that has been spent into the economy since our country began that has not yet been taxed back. And I know that that's not quite obvious. That's the technical definition of it. Here's the simple definition of it. The national debt is the total of every American citizens, plus China and Russia, whoever uses, all currency users. Every American citizen's investments, bank accounts, and wallets or pocket change. The national debt is our value. It's our worth. It's our savings. And if we were going to pay off the national debt, if we really want to get it down to zero, then that means by definition we would have to empty out, zero out everybody's investments, bank accounts, and wallets. And that doesn't seem like a very good idea. So, the deficit, the balanced budget, and the surplus. Me and you. The big lie. The big lie. The economy of the federal government is exactly like the economy of me and you. The federal government needs income, just like us, before they can spend. So balanced budget. At the beginning of the week, I write out my budget and I have $100. I determine that $100 is what I need to get through the week for food and gas and everything I need. At the end of the week, I spent exactly $100. I was fiscally responsible. I budgeted perfectly. Surplus. I budgeted $100 at the beginning of the week for food and kids and gas and everything. At the end of the week, I only spent $85. I have $15 left over and I can take my wife to a movie. I was not just responsible, I was extra responsible. I was fiscally responsible. I budgeted well. Finally, deficit. Beginning of the week, I budget $100 for everything I need. At the end of the week, unfortunately, I had to spend $120. I had to dip into my savings. I had to take out a credit card, spend some on a credit card. I had to get out a loan. I was fiscally irresponsible. I didn't budget as well. Maybe hit some bad luck. But my budget, I went over budget. I was in deficit. I had a deficit. I was fiscally irresponsible. But now let's talk about the federal government, which is totally opposite world. The purpose of a good faith government, of one that cares about the people, the purpose of a good faith government is to compel the people to use its real resources for the benefit of society. And money is the incentive that the government gives to its people for doing so. They tax some of it back, but the rest of it the people get to keep, no strings attached. And they get to use it to save and invest and spend and have in their wallets. So the federal government, a balanced budget. The federal government spends $1 billion into the economy to do things that is necessary, implement laws and just get what's needed to be done, infrastructure, so on. They spend $1 billion into the economy. They create $1 billion. And in April, they tax $1 billion back. All of it. 100% of it. So the American people now have in their pocket nothing. They have nothing. They have no value. They have no incentive to do what the government needed them to do. And what was the purpose of them spending that money into the economy to begin with? What was the purpose of that? Excuse me for a moment, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I don't know if anybody heard it anyway, but I didn't. It was annoying me. Sorry about that. Here we go. So the government spent $1 billion into the economy, and in April taxed back exactly the same thing. And when you borrow from the bank, you truly do owe all that money back plus interest. But that's not the purpose of the federal government. The federal government is supposed to spend money into the economy to give its people value so that they do what's necessary to help the society. So if you spend $1 billion into the economy and you tax it all back, what's the difference of simply putting a gun to the people's head and saying you must do infrastructure and implement this law and fight, be in our army? Excuse me. What's the purpose of spending that money into the economy to begin with? There is no purpose. If you're going to tax it all back, there's no purpose in spending it to begin with. Not for the federal government. There is no purpose. So the people, the American people, have nothing in their pockets at the end of the year, so they can't invest, they can't save, and they can't spend. And the only way to pay their taxes, they only have enough to pay their taxes. The only way to actually survive and buy food and buy gas and take care of your family is to dip into your value or to take out your credit card or to get a loan. Okay, so surplus, same thing. Federal government spends $1 billion into the economy to compel the people to do what's beneficial to society. In April, they tax $1.2 billion and $100 and spend $100 into the economy, and they tax $120 back. So forgive me, I'll say that again. The federal government spends $100 into the economy and taxes $120 back. So the American people don't just have nothing, they have less than nothing. They have to dip into their value just to pay their taxes or get out a credit card or a loan. Just to pay their taxes. This makes even less sense than a balanced budget as far as the federal government is concerned. It is worse than putting a gun to the people's heads. The people cannot spend, they cannot invest, they cannot save, they cannot even pay their taxes, let alone support their families, unless they dip into their savings or get a loan or use their credit cards. And then finally, the deficit. So the federal government spends $1 billion into the economy and they tax $300 million back. So they spend $1 billion, they tax back $300 million. The people have $700 million left. They have money in their pockets. They have money to save. They have money to invest. They have money to spend. They have plenty of money to spend to pay their taxes. And there is much less pressure to get out loans, and to use their credit cards. So a deficit is not just important. Without a deficit, we would not have a society. Society would break down because our citizens would not have any value. So what I think is that our deficit should be called our national income. And I think our debt, our national debt, should be called our national value. And I've heard other people say it should be called our national savings. So that's the debt. That's the deficit, surplus, and balanced budget. So our politicians, our media, our education system, and our so-called experts want the American people to feel that a balanced budget for you is the same as a balanced budget for them, that it's responsible. And it is completely opposite world. It is a terrible thing for the federal government to do. A deficit for me and you is a bad thing. For them, it is necessary to have a deficit in order to have a society. Yes, sometimes maybe that deficit should be eliminated or lowered, given potential inflation or demand or any of the possible reasons. But overall, a deficit is critical to the functioning of a society. Okay, I'm going to take my second break now. Take a look at your feedback. Someone asked, I think Aaron asked who my teacher is, and my teacher is Jeff Ginter. I've also learned quite a lot from Ellis Winningham, but the person who introduced me to it and grabbed my hand and took a deep dive with me was Jeff Ginter. So let's see. The money is not there. It was never there. It is not true to say that the federal government has money. It is not true to say that the federal government does not have money. Doesn't make sense to say that. When the federal government creates money or spends money, it is never so they can hold it. It is always so someone else can have it. Anytime a federal politician or anyone refers to the federal level, federal government, federal economy, with the words taxpayers' money, balanced budget, surplus, and deficit, and debt, and borrow, they are either dramatically misunderstanding how our economy works, or they have incentive to misunderstand how the economy works. Dan Sachs. Money is spent into existence. Money is taxed out of existence. Everything that happens between is the economy. Period. The reason for progressive taxation on the federal level is that it is morally sound to require the wealthy to let go of more than money let go of more than money than the poor should. The period after World War II saw a great expansion of balance of wealth in America because of the ever-rising tax brackets combined with the New Deal. I was going to say something I forget. It's just an article from Michael Hudson, I think, Virginia. I happened to see this before you told me about his name yesterday. There was an article saying that skyrocketing deficits are hurting banks' profits because deficits give the people value. Federal deficits give the people value, which puts less pressure on the people to take out bank loans and use their credit cards, which decreases bank profits. which decreases bank profits. So give the people less money, do less things for the people, and now they have more pressure to take out loans and credit, which is profit for the wealthy, profits for the corporations, because the government is getting out of the business of helping people and pushing us in deeper into the hands of for-profit industry. So yes, deficits hurt the profits of the banking industry because people have value and people have money and they don't have to take out loans or use their credit cards as much. Yeah, okay, so... Okay, on to my final part. How long are we going here? Hour and 20, whatever. Hopefully it's getting better. Someday it'll get shorter. Or maybe I'll do it in pieces eventually. I don't know. Final part. Social Security. All we hear on the news is that Social Security is going to go broke by 2030, and that's 3 years earlier than we expected. That's 3 years, even 3 years earlier than we were just recently told. People want to borrow from Social Security because we have an emergency. We need money to do this. And some people are trying to steal from Social Security because of their horrible ideas or what they want to do. Yet, how is it possible for a federal program to go broke? How is it possible for the federal program to be stolen from? How is it possible for a federal program to be borrowed from? Because all federal programs are funded by the federal government, which creates the currency. There is no money to be stolen from. There is no money to take away from, to empty. There's no money to borrow from. The Social Security Administration was created in 1935 with the Social Security law during the Depression. And what their job is to determine how much money senior citizens, beneficiaries, should get in benefits. They give those, and they use the formulas in the law, the Social Security law, to make those decisions. They don't just decide it themselves. They use the formula that they're compelled to use in the law. Those numbers of how much each beneficiary should get are given to the Treasury, and then the Treasury creates the currency and then gives it to the beneficiaries. There is no money that the benefits are taken out of. The Treasury creates the benefits every month or every year to give directly to the people. Social Security has no bank account, no bucket of money at all. Benefits are created whenever they are needed. The currency is created to pay benefits on demand. There is nothing to steal from. There is nothing to borrow from. There is nothing that can go empty or broke. And that is true with all federal programs, every single one. The FBI salary, employees' salaries for the FBI and the Congress and the Social Security Administration is created when the paychecks come due. There is no bucket of money for any federal program. However, there is one way for the Social Security Administration to go broke. It's not really the right term. But the only way that Social Security can go broke is for Congress to change the law, the Social Security law, to change those formulas to force the Social Security Administration to give the people less benefits, to give the people no benefits. That's the only way that the program can go broke, is if the Congress changes the law and they decide to change that law so that the Social Security Administration gives less and less and less and eventually none. The only way that Social Security or any federal program can go broke is if our politicians decide for it to go broke. And this is what's behind privatization. This is how they privatize things, privatize public programs so they can profit off of it. They defund it, which is in the politicians decide to defund it. Just decide. It has nothing to do with real resources. Real resources do not dictate that this needs to happen. They just decide for it to happen. So they defund it, and they also sabotage it. And then years later, they point back and they say, oh, it's broken. We've got to privatize it. And a happy coincidence, I'm going to get to profit off of that. I didn't realize that. It's just a happy coincidence. But we're going to do a private solution because the public solution is failing. We made it fail, but it's failing, and now we need to privatize it. So they don't just want to profit off of these programs. They need to get rid of these free programs so they can replace them with for-profit programs. And they do indeed want to profit off of us, but it's more than that. They actually want to become the government. Because, for example, public schools. We want to get rid of public schools because we want to have private schools that profit off of people, profit off of our education. So they do profit off of us, but it's more than that. Because when a public school now becomes private, they are no longer under the umbrella of the federal government and therefore are not subject to as many federal laws. And one perfect example is public records requests. Public agencies are subject to public records requests. Private companies are not, or very soon will not, be subject to public records requests. So not only do they get to profit off of us, they get to hide what they're actually doing. They don't have to be transparent. So it's not just profit, it is getting rid of the laws. Healthcare, we are subject to private industry deciding if we should get a procedure because of their profit motives, whether we should get a procedure or not, or whether we should be able to visit a doctor or get a medicine or not. A for-profit agency is deciding the fate of our health, and they are no longer subject to federal laws. One final example about point about Social Security. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. In 1985, under the Reagan administration, a law was passed. Well, actually, the CBO, this Congressional Budget Office, is the agency, the nonpartisan, supposedly reliable agency, governmental agency, that analyzes big bills before they're passed, when they're under consideration. So they analyzed the tax break. They analyzed Trump care. And they said, this is how many people are going to die. This is how many people it's going to cover. This is how much it's going to cost. And they also say for Social Security, this is how they analyzed. Actually, I'm not even sure how to say that. But the law in 1985 actually forced the CBO to start using scare words, economic scare words of debt and deficit. And Social Security is going to go broke by this time. So the CBO is not filled necessarily with sinister people, but the law compels them to use these economic scare words. So there might be good analysis underneath this, but it is all framed in this economically inaccurate way to scare the people and to privatize. That's an example of sabotaging for privatization. So final points before we get into our conclusions. Money is not a thing like steel and rubber or gold. It's no longer backed by gold. Money is no different than inches. Money is no different than gallons. Money is no different than a pound, a kilogram, a weight, pound. So a dollar and a pound, a British pound and a yen, an Australian dollar, all of them can be exchanged for each other. A quart can be exchanged for a gallon, can be exchanged for a milliliter. A pound can be exchanged for a kilogram, can be exchanged for a ton. Inches can be exchanged for centimeters, can be exchanged for miles, can be exchanged for kilometers. So when we measure something, a physical object, it does not make sense to say that we can run out of inches. I hope we don't run out of inches because I need to measure this whole thing. I hope we don't run out of points because the Phillies just scored their 20th run and I ran out of points from the bucket in the back office. That doesn't make sense. We can't run out of these things. And the same is true with dollars. We can't run out of dollars. Dollars simply is a measuring unit of, is it a unit of measurement for debts and obligations. A dollar measures a debt and an obligation. I can only touch on that. That's basically the extent of my knowledge of that, but that goes pretty deep. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, so racism. Racism is a tool to tear the people apart. Xenophobia is a tool to tear the people apart. We must be angry at the immigrants that stole our jobs. We shouldn't be angry at the powerful boss that chose to hire them instead of an American, screwing both of them. We should be angry at the powerless immigrant because they stole our jobs. Xenophobia is a tool to tear the people apart. Classism is a tool to tear the people apart. You are poor, you have less money than me, you are less good than me. Economic ignorance is a tool to tear the people apart. The American people have the perfect storm of misinformation to fight each other to no end. Progressives want big programs. I want universal health care. I want free college. I want a living wage. Modern money doesn't speak anything about these things, but that's what I want. Federal job guarantee. These are big programs that cost a lot of money, but the federal government has infinite money, and labor is infinite, effectively infinite. People are born, people can be educated. Labor is effectively infinite, given enough time. So I want these big programs. And some progressives will say, some Democrats will say, please raise my taxes in order to pay for health care. Don't use it for the military, but I want it to be used for health care. And not just for me. I want health care for everyone because I care about everybody. But there is a whole population out there who are terrified of raised taxes. And the second they hear that I want big programs, they immediately know to be true that that means that their taxes will go up because their taxes pay for the big programs that I want. It's not economically true. That is not economically accurate. Yet they believe it to be accurate. And even progressives and Democrats believe that. Most of them believe that to be true. So this pits those who are against raised taxes against those who want their taxes to go up in order to pay for these things. And those of us who understand modern money, that no taxes don't have to go up, but we still want these things. But they believe their taxes are going to go up. They are terrified of the consequences of raised taxes. They are terrified that they are going to go bankrupt, their family is going to go bankrupt, their business is going to go bankrupt, and the country is going to go bankrupt. They know that this is true, and therefore they are against what we want. Not because they're against healthcare, not because they're against having a job, not because they're against education, but because they are convinced that they will go bankrupt if we dare consider these programs. And this makes me think of the world is flat. And that if you get in a boat and you travel out to sea, you will fall off the edge of the earth. You will fall off the edge of the economic cliff. We know that the world is round. That doesn't make sense. You don't need to raise taxes, federal taxes, in order to pay for federal programs. That does not make economic sense. If we have the real resources to do it, we can do it. If we have the real resources to do it, that by definition means that we can afford it. Money doesn't matter to the federal government. The world is round. But they are so terrified of falling off the economic edge of the earth that they refuse to step foot into the boat. That is so terrifying to them that they will not even consider the possibility. So economic ignorance tears the people apart. People who know modern money to be true fight other progressives because other progressives will say, progressive media, and even Bernie Sanders will say, rich must pay their fair share in taxes so we can have infrastructure. That's what Bernie says. And truly progressive media still says they're blowing a hole in the deficit. They're exploding the national debt. And how do we pay for it? This is how we pay for it. We can tax the rich. We can lower the military. We don't have to have these military jets. That we have to get that money from them. So progressives are fighting each other. And the progressive movement does almost everything right. They can describe what's wrong with the world because we don't have health care. This is why it's bad. This is how people are suffering. We can describe this is what the healthcare program that we deserve to have. This is how it would work. This is how the people would benefit. We can envision the world as it should and could be. That's what Bernie Sanders taught us. But the one step that we need to actually get these programs, the progressive movement messes up, fatally messes up. Because of all these economic ignorance, because of all these economic inaccuracies. So but that's not all, because we also fight the powerful. The big lie is that the economy of the federal government is just like the economy of me and you. The federal government needs income before they can spend. So many people, most people, and we are almost exclusively told that we must tax the rich in order to get their money. We must lower the military in order to use that money instead for programs for us. We must first tax the rich before we can get what we need. We must first reduce the military before we can get what we need. We must wrest the money from the powerful's cold, dead hands, from the cold, dead hands of the powerful. We must beg them for it or take it from them before we get what we need to survive. So that pits the powerless against the powerful. Everybody is fighting everybody, and the only ones that get what they want are the masters of the universe. Final example, I think. Yeah. Medicare for all. Why don't we have Medicare for all? Not having Medicare for all chains us to our job because we don't have because we won't have health care or health insurance if we leave our job. So if we leave our job, our whole family is going to be in jeopardy. So those people who have health insurance through their jobs are now dependent on that, and therefore less inclined to stand up to their bosses because they fear losing their job, because they fear losing those benefits. that they need to survive. So your bosses can say, I dare you to stand up to me. I dare you to ask for more money. I dare you to not take my abuse, because there's plenty of people waiting in line to have this job. I don't need you. You will do what I say, or you will lose your job, and then your health insurance will be taken away, and your whole family will be in severe trouble. So yes, they do want to profit off of our sickness and suffering and our death. They do. But that's not the biggest thing. What the biggest thing I believe is that they don't give us Medicare for all because it chains us to our jobs. Because if we could leave our jobs and not worry about health care for our family, then we could run for office and we could take over their jobs. And we could get good faith people that care about the people into government. And we could create the government that helps the people and gives the people what they need to survive. And that's what they don't want. Power is relative. The only way, I learned this from Caitlin Johnstone, power is relative. The only way for powerful people to stay powerful is to actively keep the powerless powerless. It's the only way. And if we get Medicare for all, instantaneously power will transfer from the powerful to the powerless, and they can't have that. They don't want us to be able to stand up to our bosses, and they don't want us to be able to run for office. And as a side benefit, they get to profit off of us. Federal job guarantee. A federal job guarantee means that we could have a local job with a living wage and a minimum benefits, health benefits, and so on. Another tool so that the people can stand up to their bosses and not have to take a starvation wage, not have to take abuse. And they say, the employee can say to the boss, I don't need you. I can get a job near my house with a living wage and with benefits. I don't need to take this abuse. I'm leaving unless you improve my working conditions, my salary. And that's why they don't want a federal job guarantee. It's because they can't have people standing up to their bosses. And the term natural unemployment we hear all the time. What does natural unemployment mean? It is some percentage, 4%, 3%, that if unemployment goes below that number, we will have horrible inflation and the economy will blow up. But what the real reason for natural unemployment is not to avoid inflation. It's to prevent our society from getting very, very close to a federal job guarantee. And if we got to that point, then people could stand up to their bosses. And that's what they don't want. They do not want people to be able to give power to the people. Excuse me. The second we get a federal job guarantee, an enormous amount of power transfers from the powerful to the people. And then finally, the masters of the universe use the big lie that the economy of the federal government is just like me and you, that the federal government needs income and before they can spend. They use this big lie to hide the fact that they simply do not want to give us what we need to survive, because that would give us power. And the pay for question, how are you going to pay for it? We walk to the Congress and we say, we demand single-payer health care, and we demand it tomorrow. And that federal employee, our politician, the congressman, turns to us and say, oh, I wish I could give it to you. I would love to give it to you. There's nothing more than I want than to give it to you. I know how much you want it. I know how much it would help you. I know how much it would alleviate your suffering. But I can't. Because how are we going to pay for it? Because of all these economic things that are out of my control. The debt, the deficit, money, fiscally responsible, natural unemployment. I can't because of all of these things that are out of my control. But the truth is that they are hiding behind these things, these economically inaccurate things, to hide the fact that they simply don't want to give it to us because they're paid not to want to give it to us. So the answer to the pay for question, you go to the Congress, you say, I demand this now. They said, I would love to, but how are you going to pay for it? The technical answer is because you want to pay for it, because you can create as much money as you want whenever you want. As long as we have the resources, we can do it. That's the technical answer. But to me, the actual answer, the practical answer, is when they say, how are you going to pay for it? We respond by getting you out of office and replacing you with someone who will never ask that question again. They will do whatever, this new person will do whatever it takes to get the job done. And all of our energy from that point on is to make this politician's life a living hell until they give us what we need or they get out of office. So a couple of final points is the Democratic Party lowers their standards. They don't want to fight for Medicare for all because they fear the population of people that don't want their taxes raised. So they lower their standards. They don't fight for single-payer health care because they would rather cater to the economically inaccurate fears of those who don't want their taxes raised because they need their votes. They want their votes. They would rather cater to these economically inaccurate fears of raised taxes than instead of helping the people who are suffering and dying in reality. The Democratic Party lowers their standards to cater to these fantasies, and they don't help all the people that are actually suffering and dying. That's why they lower their standards. Everything we ask for in a state of economic ignorance. We fall for their tricks. We fall for their traps, the pay for question. We are so angry at our politicians because they use the knowledge of modern money against us that we choose not to learn modern money. And we effectively choose to remain economically ignorant and guarantee that we will continue to fall for their tricks. We don't need to fight the powerful because we don't need their money. We don't need to fight the powerful. We need to stop fighting each other. We don't need to convince the politicians to change. We don't need to convince the rich to change or to give us their money. We simply need to convince each other of how our economy actually works so we can stop falling for these tricks and organize and get the bad faith politicians out of government and get good faith people into government so we can create a government that gives us what we need to survive. The end. An hour and 50 minutes. Whew. All right. Let's see what you have to say. Don't see many comments at all. Let me try and open this again. All right, I really don't like how long this is, but it is what it is. It is better organized and I believe more accurate. I still, of course, have more to learn, but it is certainly vastly improved over my original version with Graham. But I definitely don't like how long it is, but I really wonder how much shorter it's going to get. But anyway, it is what it is. Let's see. Virginia, I don't make broad statements like that. I can't know what that's about because I don't see any things before that. Linking Stephen DeVore. Linking healthcare to our jobs is nothing more than extortion on the working. It's interesting. I don't quite understand that, but that certainly feels right. Insurance and raised costs of living simply for profits is by definition economic terrorism. Yeah, and even vote blue no matter who is really bad. It's lower your standards. I think it by definition means they do not understand the economy. Because if they did, we wouldn't have to vote blue no matter who. We could vote for those who actually understand the economy. Sarah Smith actually won her election after being declared the loser. She actually ended up winning. So that was a huge upset. She's a Justice Democrat. I don't know if she knows modern money, but I sure hope she does. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, does. So let's see. Mark Fabian, politicians tell us that Medicare for all is too expensive to be sustainable. But the lens of MMT proves that what they are really saying is, we don't want you to have that. That's it. It's power. They don't want us to have power. They want to keep their power. The only solution, there is only one solution, and that is to get our corrupt politicians out of government and to get good faith people who actually care about the people into government. That's the only solution. This government will not use the knowledge of modern money to help the people. They're not going to. They're paid not to. The only way to change it is to get them out and get new people in. That's it. I don't see any other solution. Let's see. Change the politicians, not their minds. We don't need to convince anyone. We don't need to convince any of the powerful people. We just need to get them out. We need to convince the people so we become strong enough to get them out. Until we stop fighting each other, we will never get them out. That's what they bank on. Everybody fights everybody. We can't organize. We waste our time on the pay for question. We will never have the energy or time to organize and get them out. There is no problem with disagreeing on policy. There is no problem with using the knowledge of modern money for different things. There is no problem with disagreeing on those things. There is a big problem with disagreeing on the reality of how our economy works. That's a big problem. We need to stop disagreeing on turn it down. Can you stop it? Sorry about that. I lost what I was saying. Sorry, someone has to remind me what I was saying. Don't recall. Yes, I don't see any other way. I probably break it into maybe 10 pieces or something. It's like a 10-piece series or something. I don't know. I do want to perfect this before I do that, but certainly I'm getting closer. I still am. I do think that that's probably the idea, is to break it into like 10 pieces or something. I think that's it. So I wish I could see old comments. Facebook just does not allow me to do that. So unfortunately, I can only acknowledge like the most recent stuff. Thanks for being with me. I know it takes a while. At the moment, I don't know how to shorten it, but I'm certainly working on that. But accuracy and well organized is my first priority. So it is getting better, and it will continue to get better. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for sharing this knowledge. I would love to see other people teach it so I can, see it in different ways. But I will see you next week. We'll see what changes. And I'm going to be teaching Regina. I am teaching my friend, Regina Bolton. I interviewed her 2 years ago, an amazing interview. I am teaching her modern money on Real Progressives at 9 o'clock on Tuesday night. I am very excited for this. This is my first public one-on-one lesson since Graham Elwood. I am also excited. Maybe this is premature, but it's already been decided. I'm going to be teaching Graham Elwood again with this new version. We're scheduling it now. So I'm excited to do that as well. So I look forward to it. And yes, graphics. When it's finalized, I absolutely will be integrating some slides or graphics or whatever. I don't know how to do that with Facebook Live. Hold a piece of paper up. I don't know. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree that that's a good idea. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. Cynthia from the Philippines, watching from the Philippines. That's pretty amazing. Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. A web page. That's a low tech idea of how to get it done. Thank you, Sean. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being with me. See you next week. See you Tuesday night at 9 o'clock on Real Progressives with Regina, and Saturday as well. We'll do this again, slightly better. Thanks, everybody. Good night.